from Zeppelin Co, and this is the second of my seminar series in which I talk about, like the title says, transducer battles, the rise and rise of IEMs. So IEMs, if you look at the show floor, right, they're going to be 50%, perhaps more than 50% IEMs than headphones. The number of brands that are going to be there with all sorts of multi-driver technologies or single dynamic drivers that you can fit into your ear without wearing big headphones around on the street, or you need to plug into your desk. These are actually going to be dominating this show, and I think based on the evidence of the last 3 years, they're actually going to carry on this upward trend in which the IEMs, the earphones that were once little gadgets that were cool, but maybe not as serious as full-size headphones with big rigs, big amplifiers that you listen to at home. They're going to be commanding more market share, and you're going to be hearing more of them, reading about them, and you're going to be trying more of them. And chances are you will own a couple of them in the next few years or this year. So I think regarding earphones, everyone here is an earphone, right? Everyone here owns one. And I assume they can span as little as $100 up to a few thousand among you. Or those of you that have not gone there yet, or may not be able to fathom that price for something so miniature. I think eventually the reason for getting an earphone is going to be so compelling that you're going to pick an earphone of the same budget over a headphone, just because you're going to be using it more. You're going to be using it with more sources in more use case scenarios, and with, I think, less commitment, because you don't need to upgrade your desktop rig. Bit by bit, the phones are going to be able to give you all the streaming services and all the amplification and DAC support you need. But it's not surprising in a way, because if we look at our industry of hi-fi and high fidelity in general, it's always been on this miniaturization trend. In the 50s, when I think stereo first started out, you had these big boxes with big horns, and they were necessary to produce any kind of listenable sound from the relatively low-powered tube amplifiers that you could squeeze out a few watts from them, and they had to be big cabinets to fill the room with air and give you enough air pressure. And that slowly shrunk to bookshelf speakers. And then maybe in the 90s to 2000s, headphones came up. Hi-Fi is a big forum. Just before that, there was also Headroom, I think run by Tile Hertzens. Headroom, yeah. And this hobby has progressed from one or two small products to an entire movement, and then an entire industry with R&D and with investment and big companies backing them. And so headphones came, and then closed-back headphones started sounding good, and now we get to earphones. And I'm just going to preface this segment that I'm just an observer. I'm a fan. I'm a hobbyist, but I'm not actually, on an R&D level. I'm not on a manufacturer level. The information I give you, in a way, is interpretation as much as what I actually learned from the people building them. So, in a way, I love this conversation because it's just so stimulating. Every year on year, there is progress, and there are results to show for it, because things do sound better from cheap hi-fi to super flagships that have just started popping up. Today is going to be about theory, not so much application. I'm just going to chart it by saying that if headphones watershed moment, I think was in 2016, the time when they really became very big, building on the success of the HD800 and the HD800S. Then you had Focal come in with the Utopia, and you had Mr. Speakers back then, the Ether, and Hi-Fi Man with the HE1000. That 2016 moment was big for headphones. That moment for earphones was probably around 2019, 2020. Nowadays, you have soundstage, you have fidelity, you have resolution, you have accuracy, you have coherence, and you have realism. So I think we've become a lot more demanding of the earphones that we carry around today. And just one look at the forums will see lots of differing opinions about what an IEM is really worth. And my IEM, gives me more for what I paid for it, things like that. And this kind of debate is stimulating, and I think the manufacturers do enjoy it because they are constantly challenged to improve on things. And every flagship along the way, we've seen progress from the EXT1000 from Sony in 2013, the K3003 by AKG, the made in Austria version, the Shure 846, the Katana, from Noble, and then we had the Empire ES Zeus, and then the MDR Z1R in 2018, and today we have the Odin with the Traley, we have the Vision ES EXT, the Phoenix, all that, so I could go on, and I can't even count them on two hands anymore. Not only are flagship earphones equal in sound quality to headphones, they actually can claim, I think, to be superior to headphones. And I think some people in the hobby will tell you they like earphones more than headphones. Yeah, anyone here likes earphones more than headphones? Okay, cool. What's your favorite earphone, perhaps? What's your favorite earphone? Okay. What about you, sir? Okay, fair enough. Okay, I mean, that's a real thing, man. Oh man, okay. I know that challenge. Usually, it's, to be honest, it's the other way around. Someone cannot squeeze the earphone in, like ladies. That's equally valid. Cool. What about you, sir? What's your favorite earphone?
The Shure 846.
Oh, 846. Okay, classic, really, man, to this day. Bram?
Yeah. The recent one, Helios.
Okay. Okay. Awesome. Yeah. And so we have a big brand like Shure, long industry name, classic to this day, unchanged. And we have someone from China pushing the limits with all sorts of new parts and things like that. And then we have a local DIYer turned professional. You look at that. This kind of input from so many departments, and each one with a valid name, a valid reason to appreciate it, right? It's stimulating again. And so we talked about R&D. The pushing of barriers, I think, in the last 2020, this decade has been very audacious. From new drivers, new enclosures, and then suddenly you have people not worrying so much about fit anymore. Things like the MDR Z1R, things like the Helios, sound matted more than everything else. Things like the Clarier i640. And none of these, you see, these have all surfaced in the last 5 years as well. And they all sound a lot better. So we have this huge market today. And why there are so many in the first place is because I think tastes vary wildly. It's hard to nail down. So the Harman curve, right? Very easy for someone like Samsung or Apple to build a mass-produced earphone like that. But that's just one sound. And then we have things like the 846, like the Monarch Mark II, and the Symphonium, perhaps conforming to a different standard. Perhaps their work was again built upon the Harman curve, which, if you all need some background, it was Sean Olive defining a frequency response that the market responded to. Is a statistic and objective study. And you can own something that sounds like the Harman curve, but you have something that's V-shaped on the other hand, you have something that's mid-forward, and things like that. And each IEM, really, it's an opportunity to appreciate a different sound and turn to it based on moods as well. Yep, so a flagship tube amp or a flagship desktop amp in the past was the way we did this picture we had of high-end audio. Just dominate, right? Everyone was mentioning I'd have this big, powerful amp drive HE6, for instance. It's no longer the case because we can't carry these open bags around with us. And so this quality and convenience from earphones means that with modern portable DACs, if there is a free lunch in audio, this is it, in which it's easy to use and things like that. The best setup, I think, is the one that you can use the most. Okay, and versatility I've touched on as well. So where we've really come on, by the way, that says pushing the IEM envelope. Where we've really come on, I'm going to touch on two things that have really defined earphones as serious flagship contenders. One of them would be coherence. This is the trait, I think, of getting so many drivers in one shell to sound like one. And it's been a big challenge of IEM development, right? The last 10 years, you've had multi-driver IEMs, and they've all sounded a little bit weird sometimes because you had one driver for the bass and one for the treble, and so on and so forth. And there's so many expressions of it. But none could actually rival a single dynamic driver for just one sound that sounded believable. And so this was the call to fame of single dynamic drivers, in which there was no crossover. I'll get to what a crossover is called later, or what it's about later on, but it was all the frequencies being produced by a single driver, and if there's a single voice, it can therefore not be too confusing, like many drivers mixed up together, all arriving in your ear at scattered frequencies and things like that. And then in 2018 and 2019, I think we had things like the Noble Katana, and we had the Empire Ears Zeus, and the 64 Audio A18. Suddenly, with a snap of the finger, things just sounded whole and real. And I always like to marvel at this with my customers. How do you sound? How do 18 drivers sound like one? But this choir singing in your ear, and you hear each individual driver perhaps with its own voice, and some can consider that a flaw. But when you experience it, and then they all sound like one in unison, right? That's quite special, actually. And it's an experience one doesn't easily forget. I think you can talk about drivers and topologies again, going back to hybrids and things like that. I don't terribly find that my focus. I guys have a seat, make yourself comfortable. Yeah, I don't find drivers. It dominates the talk on forums, one dynamic driver and one E-stat and things like that. But to me, achieving this coherence was about that one thing that usually went unmentioned, is that crossover that we're talking about, in which a crossover is this circuit board of various electric devices, things like capacitors, resistors, inductors, that would split the frequency up. And so the human can hear 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, right? And then it gets assigned to different drivers. Hi, have a seat, make yourself comfortable. It would have many drivers producing many frequencies. You all following me here? Yeah. But getting to do so in a cohesive manner was difficult. And the reason I was thinking of that is you have phase issues. I think that's number one doubt with multi-drivers. If you have various drivers rolling off and then the next driver taking over, you would have clashes in something called phase. So phase would be the timing of the frequencies arriving in your ear. It is the one unmeasurable with frequency response, actually. So you see all these frequency response curves floating around. They tell you enough about the IEM, but they don't tell you how it'll sound, because one primary reason being phase. Now, phase is a bit difficult to explain without diagrams. Usually I do it with a whiteboard, but I just want you all to imagine frequency being a flat line, and then you have phase kind of living on it as this waveform. Brahms, that is pretty much it, yeah. And so as this flat line sounds like that, all the frequencies up and down, they kind of arrive in your ear correctly, but as the phase tilts down, as the frequency tilts down and you have a driver rolling off, the phase follows it. And suddenly you have this scattered arrival, because things are not arriving on time anymore. And so lows can sound muddy as a result, despite having a dynamic driver. Instead of impactful taut bass, you have very muffled, slow-sounding, veiled response that isn't realistic, and then you have highs that can sound harsh because suddenly cymbals are not arriving on time and they sound like nails on chalkboard. I think we've all experienced that, right? And then if you look at your past experiences with multi-drivers, and you look at today, it's increasingly rare, even at the very bottom of the chain, that you find such phase issues plaguing your listening. All you can focus on is how weird this sounds. All with me here? Yeah. So, that's one key to this crossover business. And so I like looking at modern crossovers as being a little bit more shallow and steep. Let's say you have a bass driver that's supposed to play until 10 hertz, that's 100 hertz, and then you have a mid-range driver that's supposed to take over at 160. Maybe an old crossover would try to roll off or cut the feed of frequencies at a very steep angle, such that by the time you're at 160 hertz, that signal is 24 dB down, as compared to today, which might lead to a shallower curve, maybe a 6 dB down by that point, but it leads to this effortless blending of drivers. I think we've gotten into that a lot better. And a lot of this also applies to speakers, by the way, but speakers work with a lot more variable factors, things like room placement and positioning of them and the sources, etc. Whereas with an earphone, everything is contained within the tiny ears, the tiny enclosure of the ear. So it's a lot easier to control, and each person, when they hear an earphone, they get the same result. I think that's great. Right? Another thing to do with phase is also realism, and this is about a reproduction of dynamics, partly related to crossover slopes and phase management. It would be how things sound taut and precise and tight, especially at the frequency extremes, because those high-res jokes that we may have made in the past, in that no one could really hear into 40 kilohertz, right? No one can hear it. We can feel 1 hertz, for instance. But the human hearing range of 20 hertz to 20 kilohertz, the 40 hertz roll-off that the high-res audio sticker claims to give you passes through 20 kilohertz as well. And so whatever happens at 40 kilohertz actually indirectly affects what happens at 20 kilohertz, because if your earphone, let's say, goes to 24 instead of the 40 kilohertz, you would have it at a minus 10 dB point, so your frequency would plummet, and then you would have the phase starting to get all messy too early, such that what happens earlier, if you roll off at 24 kilohertz like that, then your 16 kilohertz point, your 10 kilohertz point is also going to get affected, and you're going to hear messy phase and this unconvincing reproduction of dynamics where things don't connect in the way you want. Again, sorry, it's a bit hard to explain without diagrams, but you all following me over here? Okay, great. If you have any questions, please visit Zeppelin Co as well. I will be happy to take you through in a bit more detail as well. But this realism in terms of dynamics has been good for us. Last of all, new technologies. These crossovers, at the end of the day, are facilitators for the final sound. And while I don't believe that an earphone can be defined just by driver topologies, it's right to also recognize the different things that have come out. Electrostatic earphones, I think that happened in maybe 2019 when you had the Jomo Trinity. That was a really good one, which would use a electrostatic tweeter to produce the very high frequencies. I find electrostatic tweeters great because they produce highs that don't have a sound. They are air that you perceive. It's a bit more natural that way, in the way a cymbal might strike and go through the room. The coloration of the driver is a bit less. But those early electrostatics, apart from the Trinity, they had low SPL and that it was a bit hard to squeeze volume out of them. But today we also have acoustic techniques to, for instance, craft ears. They use something we call a horn, which would be to put an acoustic amplifier at the output of a very soft thing so that my voice immediately becomes louder without straining myself. I'm speaking at the same volume and my voice is louder, things like that. And so because people tried in 2019, we have the progress today and electrostatic drivers in earphones, things like the Linsol, for instance, I mean the T-Audio, they're going to become more commonplace at not a lot of money. And then the challenge, I like competition, and the challenge would be on something like the Empire's Odin to then, say, I've got to do more with an electrostatic driver because it costs more money, right? So this pushes, each manufacturer pushes each other and spurs us to give us better products. And it's so hard to find a bad flagship earphone today. What's come up since also would be bone conduction, which is this vibrating thing in your earphone in various executions. It's hard to define a single style, but usually has to do with the driver, the transducer, vibrating in a way that the ears in your cochlea could perceive it, because these vibrations travel through the skull right to the root of your ear. And that's where a lot of these spatial cues, like massive soundstage and earth-shaking bass, they give you that perception. So that's cool. That's newer. We're going to see more expressions. I think the first one that really gained prominence, we've all tried aftershocks. They tickle a bit, and that's one driver. It's bone conducting, but it's not high fidelity. I think the first one we need to recognize is the unique melody mesh. And then the Empire Ears Evo came out with, instead of a vibrating faceplate, you had this big AA size transducer in the back, and it would shake, and you could feel it, actually. So added to the realism is like a true subwoofer. And now the unique melody Max also uses a unit like that. So we'll keep an eye on that. A link to the chain relates to how you make your flagships express themselves best today. Just like, you wouldn't plug a Hi-Fi Man HE6 or Susvara into your phone. Similarly, today's kilobuck flagships require good sources, and that's really come up since. I touched on this a bit before in the previous segment about how music players were getting really good, both from a usability standpoint, but now let me talk about the fidelity of a music player. In the past, they were small, had limited battery size, had limited power output, and designers weren't very creative because they were using something we call op-amps to design a circuit. Now, op-amp, in today's meaning, would be an integrated chip that you can buy off the shelf, mass-produced, have the same characteristics all the time. One characteristic is an ideal op-amp has infinite gain. Today's audio op-amps have very, very high gain that you would need to then close down with something called negative feedback. And this is something I'll be covering in the 4 p.m. Seminar. But what this starts out to be is you have kind of this common sound between DAPs in which, they give you sound, they give you volume, but neither gives you a certain identity in the way that a desktop amp might aim to achieve, because it's bigger, they've had more time to design it and things like that. That's a thing of the past today, because in 2020, 2021, we had increased numbers of discrete DACs that would have circuits. Instead of building with ICs, they would have individual transistors. The best analogy I can think of here would be Maggi Mee or instant noodles, right? Instant noodles, you have something that comes out of a packet, you put boiling water on it. Every instant noodle is going to taste within 90% of the next one. You don't really need skill to do it. But if a discrete circuit is like cooking a gourmet meal, cooking a pasta, for instance, what ingredients you use, what sauce you want to do, how little salt you want to add. A discrete circuit gives you opportunity to tailor and tweak. the sound. And that manufacturers are getting really adventurous with it. Today, this CanJam, I think we're really proud to debut the Hi-B R52 from China. That is a $529 DAP that has an entirely discrete circuit without op-amps. That's quite a triumph. And with that, Hi-B have really been able to say they created this product from scratch and give you a sound that no other DAP will. Going back to the gain of op-amps, what we love about today's DAPs are that they are going to have less gain. Those with discrete circuits require you to climb the volume more. And this is a surprising thing that I found people do, right, is when they realize they're climbing the volume, they actually turn up the gain. It's like, why do I have to go above 50, for instance? I think not knowing that you're able to get your volume up is a good thing in audio. So just anyone familiar with that? Have I told anyone here to keep your gain low when your volume high? No one? Okay, good. But that's me telling, yeah, okay. Yeah, my boss is in the back, by the way. Her name's Christy. It's part of the staff curriculum in which we tell people to watch out for high gain. The thing is, when you have gain, you also have noise. And when you don't use the entire travel of a volume control, particularly a digital one, you're going to realize that you're losing information. So things getting louder, but you're not actually getting better sound. You might be getting more noise come in. I listened to a respected audio engineer for a hi-fi company before, and he was talking about music players, right? And it was a bit insulting, although funny, because he said that the volume control in a DAP, a digital one, was actually a resolution control, which is true. Because when you realize that you are reducing dynamic range, when you are reducing volume by shaving off information, less information gets to your ears, you have lower signal and more noise. That's not a good thing, even if we like the sound of it. Okay, so any questions so far about DAPs? Any other curious things you might have? Okay. And dongle DACs also follow the same conversation. Once a novelty, now very serious, and that's reflected by the number of options you have, each one doing different things, each one offering someone a different sound, a different use case as well. It says parity in terms of quality. I think the takeaway here is that we need to take earphones very seriously. This is one of the reasons why I believe CanJam 2022 is a generational CanJam. It's not just another CanJam for the sake of having one. There are actual new things here. Earphones, wonderful to discover in 2022. If you're coming into the hobby now, pick up a pair of earphones and just know that whatever you choose, you have something that not only entertains you for 2 to 3 months, but you could live with it for 2 to 3 years very, very happily before you make the next step to perhaps an even better one. Yep, of course, these are based on use case. And that is all for this seminar.